Okay, welcome back. So this is the third installment to explain assignment 7055, writing about writing 1. So for this video, I'm going to be talking about the second document that you need to create in order to complete assignment 7055. Okay, so this is the wiki page that explains the assignment, and I'm going to scroll down to the tasks, and we are looking at the second task for this assignment. To see my video on the first task on an executive summary, check out my other video. This is going to be what I'm going to be referring to as the reflective memo, so that we can differentiate between the two. Okay, so this is also a memo in which you write to your boss, Alex. So make sure that you write this memo to Alex Nostrovia. And again, you'll be signing this memo or saying it is from you, your name. That way it's just clearer for me when I grade this. Okay, so in this memo, it needs to be at least 300 words. And you're going to be talking about how the challenge of aggregating and visual arrangements of a memo are relevant to the executive summary you created in step 1. Okay, so the first thing I need to figure out is what is the challenge of aggregating? So if you click on that, that will open another wiki page that explains aggregating. And basically what this asks you to do is think about who your target audience is, and your targeted audience is the person you've created a document for, or for whom you want to act upon what you've written. And so to understand aggregating, we need to first think about what they value in this document. Okay, so a thing valued, if you open that link and follow it, will basically explain to you that a thing valued is an ideal or belief, something that someone cares enough about that it would cause them to act. So in this executive summary from earlier, you had to summarize chapter 3 to the point that an executive would be able to use the same content while spending less time reading it. So what I would want to do for this assignment, for this reflection, is to think about what that reader values from that particular executive summary, why you think they would value that thing. And as a result, aggregating tells us that we should then plan our document based off of what is most valuable to our reader. So basically the challenge of aggregating, or the topic of aggregating, is placing the most relevant information in the most relevant order. So when I write my first paragraph in this reflective memo about the challenge of aggregating in the executive summary, I want to talk about what I felt would be most relevant to my boss, Alex, about lesson 3, and what order I think I would be most valuable to put that content in for Alex's use. And that's all the challenge of aggregating is. So that's part 1 of the reflective memo. Part 2 of the reflective memo asked me to talk about the visual arrangement of a memo and how that relates to the executive summary. So we've already talked about memos before. You see, if you click on this link, it'll open this page here. And I already have the example, so this is the page, and then there's an example here you can click on. So I'll be talking about the visual design of this example. But for your memo, your reflective memo, you would want to be talking about the executive summary memo you created in step 1. Okay, so I need to know what visual arrangement means, so that I can use that term to talk about the design of the memo that I made in step 1. So if I click on visual arrangement, it will open up this page here, and it talks about the proximity, contrast, repetition, and alignment of a document. So I would just read this page and get a better idea of what those 4 visual design concepts mean. And just briefly, this is what they are. I'm going to start with contrast, because I think it's the easiest. Contrast is basically anything that we do to the font to make it easier to distinguish from the white page, the white space of the paper. So if you look at this example here, anything that would increase or decrease the thickness of the ink against in comparison to either the white of the page or in comparison to other text, that is increasing contrast. So that would include bolding. See here, these letters are much larger, so having a larger font size, that's contrast. Having it italicized, that creates contrast. Having this line here is contrast. Having words be all caps, that's contrast. Having this image here, that creates contrast. Notice that this is a different font down here, and that creates contrast. So all of these choices create greater contrast between this text and this text down here. Okay, so that is contrast. The next two concepts I'm going to briefly mention from this list is proximity and alignment. And I like to talk about these together because people tend to get them mixed up. So both of these are about the spacing of your document across the page. So I have a little guide here to help us with this. So proximity talks about the vertical space of our document. So when we're talking about proximity, we're talking about how close the spacing is vertically on our page. So if you hit return a couple times between one line and the next, that is separating that content more. And so what proximity tells us is that information that is very similar or that belongs more closely together, we put less space between those lines. And when we change topics or we change to information that is less related, we want to put more space in between that and information around it. So that's basically why we have, say, returns between paragraphs, because it's separating content. So for example, looking at the vertical space here, there's quite a bit of white space between the header and the date. And so that allows us to emphasize this header before we go into this very different information, which is the date. Same thing with this white space here. That separates this information very clearly from this address here, which is different information. And so anytime you want to indicate to your reader that we are switching information, we put extra white space into the proximity. And it makes it a lot easier for them to find it. Okay, so that is proximity, and that's the vertical space, which means that alignment is then the horizontal space of our document. So that is where we use tabbing, align center, align right, and that sort of thing. So this is just another way to use the full space of your page to try to make it easier for the reader's eye to be drawn to different kinds of information. We use this a lot in resumes. So notice, for example, across the page with our alignment that telecommunications, information, and management are all tabbed over. So it looks like it's kind of on the edge of a pyramid. And so each part of that very long title then stands out a little bit more, right? Notice the rest of this, for the most part, is completely left aligned. So that makes it very expected. This image here is tabbed over. It looks like it might be centered. So that sets it apart in another way from the rest of the text. And notice that this line here at the bottom with the address is also centered. And so that sets it apart in this document. Okay, the last concept for visual design is just called repetition. And what this is consistency. So for all of your choices in proximity, contrast, and alignment, so every time you use bolding for one kind of information, you would always want to do that. For example, if I open up my example executive summary, so this is one of them. So each section has a bolded subtitle. So that is repetitious, that's consistent. If this second header here was instead italicized, that would not be consistent. And so visual design concepts tell us that every time you do have the same kind of information, such as a section heading, you should use the same proximity, alignment, and contrast, so that every time your reader scans this document, they know, oh, those are section headings. They're all the same kind of information. And all these paragraphs also have the same visual design. So I know that all of these are just body paragraphs. Okay, so those are the visual design concepts. So I'm going to go back to my assignment page now that I understand what visual arrangement is. So what this is asking me to do is analyze the memo genre of my executive summary that I created earlier using proximity, alignment, contrast, and repetition. So let's say this example memo over here is what you created. Okay, so all of this is trying to figure out what effect this has for my boss, Alex. Okay, and if I wanted to be really clever, I would try to relate my analysis of visual arrangement to the needs of my reader, the values of my reader, and why this information is aggregated the way it is in that visual design. So first I'm going to talk about, okay, well, where is contrast used? And so the word memorandum up here is larger. It's also centered for its alignment. So that sets it apart. The to and from and RE are also all caps, so that is more contrast and it sets it apart. Everything else in terms of contrast, just isn't much there. There's a little bit of alignment here. So notice that after the to line, the name is tabbed over a little to help set that information apart. And so basically in my analysis of visual design, I would just describe my visual design in those 4 terms and talk about the effect it has, why that is helpful or not to my reader for my reader's needs. And that's what that second paragraph would be about. Okay, so the first paragraph of this reflective memo is about identifying what my reader for the executive summary, Alex, cares about for chapter 3, and how that would affect in what order I put it. The second paragraph for this reflective memo would talk about the contrast, proximity, alignment, and repetition of the memo design that I wrote my executive summary in, and how that supports the needs of my reader of that executive summary. Okay, that's basically it. So this concludes my how-to video on the second document for assignment 7055. So at this point, I'm ready to put all of those things together in a single Word document, but I also know that I've been asked to put a title page in front of those 2 documents. So what I've done is opened up a Word document and I've created my own title page. And this is what I'd like to see for all of your title pages. The assignment, what it's called, created by your name, this section that you're in, and the date you created it. Very simple, that way I know exactly what I'm looking at. And then you'll simply insert a page break, and then the first thing here should be your executive summary, and then once that's done, you'll have another page break, and the last page should be your reflective memo. Then you save it, and you upload it to Moodle, right down here, where it asks you to submit assignment 7055 in one document. All right. If you have any further questions, please feel free to bring them to our virtual classroom or send me an email. Thank you.